Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Star Wars Episode 5, right? Yeah, that's where we are. The Empire Strikes Back. I think that's the first time I said Episode 5 in regards to these books. So with any luck today, I will be getting a truck to replace my car. May she rest in peace, Little Green. I say that, but it's still up at my store where I work. Anyway, we are in Chapter 7, page 332. We're getting pretty far. Look how much is left. Look how far we've gotten. The double sets of wings on Luke Skywalker's X-Wing fighter were pulled together to form one as the small, sleek craft streaked away from the planet of snow and ice. Kind of makes me think of the North in Game of Thrones. During his flight, the young commander had time to reflect on the events of the past few days. He now had time to ponder the enigmatic words of the ghostly Ben Kenobi and think about his friendship with Han Solo, and also consider his tenuous relationship with Leia Organa. As he thought of the people he cared most about, he arrived at a sudden decision. Gazing back one last time at the small icy planet, he told himself there was no longer any turning back. Well, obviously, they can't go back to Hoth. I know what he meant, but anyway. Luke flipped a number of switches on his control board and took the X-Wing into a steep turn. He watched the heavens shift as he rocketed off in a new direction, flying at top velocity. He was bringing his craft back onto an even course when R2, still snug in his specially designed socket, began to whistle and beep. The miniature computer installed in Luke's ship for translating the droid's language flashed the small droid's message onto the control panel view screen. "There's nothing wrong, R2, Luke replied after reading the translation. "I'm just setting a new course." The small droid beeped excitedly, and Luke turned to read the updated printout on the view screen. "No," Luke replied, "we're not going to regroup with the others." This news startled R2, who immediately emitted a series of galvanic noises. "We're going to the Dagobah system," answered Luke. Again, the robot beeped, calculating the amount of fuel carried by the X-Wing. "We have enough power." R2 gave vent to a longer sing-song series of toots and whistles. "They don't need us there," Luke said to the droid's question about the planned rebel rendezvous. R2 then gently beeped a reminder about Princess Leia's order. Exasperated, the young pilot exclaimed, "I'm countermandering that order, now be still." The little droid fell silent. Luke was, after all, a commander in the Rebel Alliance, and such could countermand orders. He was making a few minor adjustments on the control when R2 chirped up again. "Yes, R2?" sighed Luke. This time the droid made a series of soft noises, selecting each beep and whistle carefully. He did not want to annoy Luke, but the findings on his computer were important enough to report. "Yes, R2, I know the Dagobah system doesn't appear on any of our navigational charts, but don't worry, it's there." Another worried beep from the R2 unit. "I'm very sure," the youth said, trying to reassure his mechanical companion. "Trust me." Whether or not R2 did trust the human being at the X-Wing's control, he only vented a meek little sigh. For a moment he was completely silent, as if thinking, then he beeped again. "Yes, R2?" This communication from the robot was even more carefully put forth than before. One might even call the whistle sentences tactful. It seemed R2 had no intention of offending the human to whom he had entrusted himself, but it wasn't possible, the robot calculated, that the human's brain was slightly, that the human's brain was slightly malfunctioning. After all, he had lain in a long time in the snowdrifts of Hoth, or another possibility computed by R2, perhaps the Wampa ice creature had struck him more seriously than 2-1B had diagnosed. "No," Luke answered, "no headache, I feel fine, why?" R2's chirp was coyly innocent. "No dizziness, no drowsiness, even the scars are gone." The next whistle rose questioningly in pitch. "No, that's all right, R2. I'd rather keep it on manual control for a while." Then the stout robot delivered a final whimper that sounded to Luke like a noise of defeat. Luke was amused by the droid's concern for his health. "Trust me, R2, Luke said with a gentle smile. "I know where I'm going, and I'll get us there safely. It's not far." Han Solo was desperate now. The Falcon had still not been able to shrug off the 4 TIE fighters or the enormous Star Destroyer that pursued it. Solo raced down the ship's hold and began to work frantically on repairing the malfunctioning hyperdrive unit. It was all but impossible to carry out the delicate repair work necessary while the Falcon shook with each blast of flak from the fighters. Han snapped the orders at his co-pilot, who checked the mechanisms as he commanded. horizontal booster. The Wookiee barked. It worked. It looked fine to him. Alluvial damper? I don't know. Let me know how you would pronounce it. But I'm not going to tell you how it's spelled. Another bark. That part was also in place. Chewie, get me the hydro spanners. Chewbacca rushed over to the pit with the tools. Han grabbed the spanners, then began... what? Then paused and looked at his faithful Wookiee friend. I don't know how we're going to get out of this one, he confided. Just then a resounding thump hit the Falcon's side, making the ship pitch and turn radically. Chewbacca barked anxiously. Han braced himself at the impact. The hydro spanners flew from his hands. When he managed to regain his balance, he shouted at Chewbacca over the noise. That was no laser blast. Something hit us. Han! Han! Princess Leia called to him from the cockpit. She was frantic. Get up here! Like a shot, he lurched out of the hold and raced back to the cockpit with Chewbacca. They were stunned by what they saw through the windows. Asteroids! Enormous chunks of flying rock hurtled through space as far as they could see, as if those darn Imperial pursuit ships weren't trouble enough. Han instantly returned to his pilot's seat, once more taking over the Falcon's controls. His co-pilot settled himself back into his own seat just as a particularly large asteroid sped by the prow of the ship. Han felt he had to stay as calm as possible, otherwise he might not last more than a few moments. Chewie, he ordered, set 271. Leia gasped. She knew that Han's order meant, what Han's order meant, and was stunned by so reckless a plan. You're not thinking of heading into the asteroid field, she asked, hoping she had misunderstood his command. Don't worry, they won't follow us through this, he shouted weakly. If I might remind you, sir, 3PO offered, trying to be a rational influence, the possibility of successfully navigating through an asteroid field is approximately 2,467 to 1. No one seemed to hear him. Princess Leia scowled. You don't have to do this to impress me, she said as the Falcon was pummeled hard by another asteroid. Han was enjoying himself enormously and chose to ignore his insinuations. Hang on, sweetheart. He laughed, grasping at the controls more tightly. We're gonna do some flying. Leia winced and resigned, buckled herself firmly into her seat. C-3PO, still muttering calculations, shut down his synthesized human voice when the Wookiee turned and growled at him. But Han concentrated only on carrying out his plan. He knew it would work. It had to. There was no other choice. Flying on more on instinct than on instruments, he steered his ship through the relentless rain of stone. That sounds kind of cool. Glancing quickly at his scanner screens, he saw that the TIE fighters and the Avengers had... I feel like it should just be Avengers. Anyway. Had not yet abandoned the chase. It would be an Imperial funeral, he thought, as he maneuvered the Falcon through the asteroid field. He looked at another view screen and smiled as it showed a collision between an asteroid and a TIE fighter. The explosion registered on the screen with a burst of light. No survivors in that one, Han thought. The TIE fighter pilots chasing the Falcon were among the best in the Empire, but they couldn't compete with Han Solo. Either they weren't good enough or they weren't crazy enough. Only a lunatic would have plunged his ship into a suicidal journey through these asteroids. Crazy or not, these pilots had no choice but to follow in hot pursuit. They undoubtedly would be better off perishing in the bombardment of rocks than reporting failure to their dark master. The greatest of all the Imperial Star Destroyers regally moved out of Hoth's orbit. It was flanked by 2 other Star Destroyers, and the entire group was accompanied by a protective squadron of smaller warships. And the central destroyer, Admiral Piet, stood outside Darth Vader's private meditation chamber. The upper jaw slowly opened until Piet was able to glimpse his robed master standing in the shadows. My lord, Piet said with reverence. Come in, Admiral. Admiral Piet felt great awe as he stepped into the dimly lit room and approached the Dark Lord of the Sith. His master stood silhouetted so that Piet could just barely make out the lines of a set of mechanical appendages as they retracted a respirator tube from Vader's head. He shuddered when he realized that he might be the first ever to have seen his master unmasked. The sight was horrifying. Vader, his back turned to Piet, was entirely clothed in black, but above his studded black neck gleamed his naked head. Eee. Though the Admiral tried to avert his eyes, morbid fascination forced him to look to that hairless, skull-like head. It was covered with a maze of thick scar tissue twisted around against Vader's corpse-pale skin. The thought crossed Piet's mind that there might be a heavy price for viewing what no one else had seen. Just then, the robot's hands grasped the black helmet and gently lowered it over the Dark Lord's head. His helmet back in place, Darth Vader turned to hear his Admiral's report. Our pursuit ships have sighted the Millennium Falcon, my lord. It has entered an asteroid field. Asteroids don't concern me, Admiral, Vader said as he slowly clenched his fist. I want that ship, not excuses. How long until you have Skywalker and the others in the Millennium Falcon? Soon, Lord Vader, the Admiral answered, trembling in fear. Yes, Admiral, Darth Vader said slowly. Soon. 2 gigantic asteroids hurled toward the Millennium Falcon. Its pilot quickly made a daring banking maneuver that brought it scurrying out of the path of those 2 asteroids, nearly to collide with a third. As the Falcon darted in and out of the asteroid field, it was followed closely by 3 Imperial TIE fighters that veered through the rocks in hot pursuit. Suddenly, one of the 3 was fatally scraped by a shapeless chunk of rock and spun off in another direction, hopelessly out of control. The other 2 TIE fighters continued their chase, accompanied by the Star Destroyer Avenger, which was blasting speeding asteroids in its path. Han Solo glimpsed the pursuing ships through the windows of his cockpit as he spun his craft around, speeding under yet another oncoming asteroid, then bringing the freighter back to its right-side-up position. But the Millennium Falcon was not yet out of danger. Asteroids were still streaking past the freighter. A small one bounced off the ship with a broad, reverberating clang, terrifying Chewbacca and causing C-3PO to cover his eye lenses with a bronzed hand. Han glanced at Leia and saw that she was sitting stone-faced as she stared at the swarm of asteroids. It looked to him as if she wished she were thousands of miles away. Well, he remarked, you said you wanted to be around when I was wrong. She didn't look at him. I take it back. That Star Destroyer is slowing down, Han announced, checking his computer readings. Good, she replied shortly. The view outside the cockpit was still thick with racing asteroids. We're going to get pulverized if we stay out here much longer, he observed. I'm against that, Leia remarked dryly. We've got to get out of this shower, that makes sense. I'm going to get in closer to one of the big ones, Han added. That did not make sense. Closer? 3PO exclaimed, throwing up his metal arms. His artificial brain could scarcely register what his auditory sensors had just perceived. Closer? Leia repeated in disbelief. Chewbacca stared at his pilot in amazement and barked. None of the 3 could understand why their captain, who had risked his life to save them all, would now try to get them killed. Making a few simple adjustments on the cockpit controls, Han swerved the Millennium Falcon between a few larger asteroids, then aimed the craft directly at one the size of a moon. A flashing shower of smaller rocks exploded against the enormous asteroid's craggy surface as the Millennium Falcon with the Imperial TIE fighters. I feel like that's not a word, but someone let me know down in the comments, like with the word rebar in the Twilight Reimagined video. Or was I still in pursuit? I feel like it should be Empire. Anyway, I'm done. Flew directly above the asteroid. It was like skimming over the surface of a small planet, barren and devoid of all life. That's kind of sad. With expert precision, Han Solo steered his ship towards still another giant asteroid, the largest one they had yet encountered, summoning all the skill that had made his reputation known throughout the galaxy. He maneuvered the Falcon so that the only object between it and the TIE fighters was the deadly floating rock. There was only a brief, brilliant flare of light, then nothing. The shattered remains of the 2 TIE fighters drifted away into the darkness, and the tremendous asteroid, undeflected in its course, continued on its way. Han felt an inner glow as bright as the spectacle that had just lighted up the view. He smiled to himself in quiet triumph. Then he noticed an image on the main scope of his control console and nudged his hairy co-pilot. There, Han said, pointing to the image. Chewie, get a reading on that. Looks pretty good. What is it? Leia asked. The Falcon's pilot ignored her question. That should do nicely, he said. As they flew near the asteroid surface, Han looked down at the craggy terrain, his eye caught by a shadowy area that looked like a crater of mammoth proportions. He lowered the Falcon to the surface level and flew it directly into the crater. Its bow-like walls, or maybe it's bowl-like walls, there we go, suddenly rising up around his ship, and still 2 TIE fighters chased after him, firing their laser cannons and attempting to mimic his every maneuver. Han knew he had to be trickier and more daring if he was to lose the deadly pursuit ship. Spotting a narrow chasm, or do you guys say chasm? I don't. Well, I just did, but you know what I meant. Through his white windscreen, he banked the Millennium Falcon to one side. The ship soared sideways through the high-walled rocky trench. Unexpectedly, the 2 TIE fighters followed. One of them even sparked as it grazed the walls with its metal hull. Twisting, banking, and turning his ship, Han pressed through the narrow gorge. From behind, the black sky flared as the 2 TIE fighters crashed against one another, then exploded against the rocky ground. Han reduced his speed. He still wasn't safe from the Imperial hunters searching about the canyon. He spotted something dark, a gaping cave mouth at the very bottom of the crater, large enough to hold the Millennium Falcon, perhaps. If not, he and his crew would know soon enough. Slowing his ship, Han coursed into the cave entrance and through a large tunnel which he hoped would make the ideal hiding place. He took a deep breath as the ship was promptly devoured by the cave's shadows. A tiny X-Wing was approaching the atmosphere of the Dagobah planet. As he neared the planet, Luke Skywalker was able to glimpse a portion of its curved surface through a heavy cover of thick clouds. The planet was uncharted and virtually unknown. Somehow Luke had made his way there, though he wasn't certain whether it was his hand alone that had guided his ship into this unexplored sector of space. R2-D2, riding in the back of Luke's X-Wing, scanned the passing stars, then addressed his remarks to Luke via the computer scope. Luke read the viewscreen interpreter. "Yes, that's Dagobah, R2," he answered the little robot, then glanced out the cockpit window as the fighter ship began to descend toward the planet's surface. "Looks a little grim, doesn't it?" R2 beeped, attempting for one last time to get his master back on a more sensible course. "No," Luke replied, "I don't want to change my mind about this." He checked the ship's monitors and began to feel a bit nervous. "I'm not picking up any cities or technology, massive lifeform readings, though. There's something alive down there." R2 was worried, and that was translated as an apprehensive inquiry. "Yes, I'm sure it's perfectly safe for droids. Will you take it easy?" Luke was beginning to get annoyed. "We'll just have to see what happens." He heard a pathetic electronic whimper from the rear of the cockpit. "Don't worry!" I feel like... never mind. The X-Wing sailed through the twilight halo, separating pitch-black space from the planet's surface. Luke took a deep breath and plunged his craft into the white blanket of mists. He couldn't see a thing. His vision was entirely obstructed by the dense whiteness pressing against the canopy windows of a ship. His only choice was to control his X-Wing solely by instruments, but the scopes weren't registering anything, even as Luke flew nearer to the planet. Desperately, he worked his controls, no longer able to discern even so much as his altitude. When an alarm began to buzz, R2 joined its clarion call with his own frantic series of whistles and beeps. I know, Luke shouted, still fighting the controls of his ship. "All the scopes are dead. I can't see a thing. Hang on, I'm going to start the landing cycle. Let's just hope there's something underneath us." R2 squealed again, but his sounds were effectively drowned by the ear-splitting blast of the X-Wing's retro rockets. Luke felt his stomach plunge as the ship began to drop rapidly. He braced against his pilot's seat, steeling himself for any possible impact. Then the ship lunged, and Luke heard an awful sound as if the limbs of trees were being snapped off by his speeding craft. Then the X-Wing finally screeched to a halt. It was with a tremendous jolt that nearly flung its pilot through the cockpit window. Certain at last that he was on the ground, Luke slumped back into his chair and sighed with relief. He then pulled a switch that lifted his ship's canopy. When he raised his head outside of the ship to get his first look at the alien world, Luke Skywalker gasped. The X-Wing was completely surrounded by mists, its bright landing lights not illuminating more than a few feet in front of it. Luke's eyes gradually began to grow accustomed to the gloom all around him, so that he could just barely see the twisted trunks and roots of the grotesque-looking trees. He pulled himself out of the cockpit as R2 detached his stout body from its cubbyhole plug. Cubbyhole. R2, Luke said, "You stay put while I look around." The enormous gray trees had gnarled and intertwining roots that rose far above Luke before they rejoined to form trunks. He tilted back his head and could see the branches high above that seemed to form a canopy with the low-hanging clouds. Luke cautiously climbed out onto the long nose of his ship and saw that he had crash-landed in a small, fog-shrouded body of water. R2 emitted a short beep, then there was a loud splash followed by silence. Luke turned just in time to glimpse the droid's domed topside as it disappeared beneath the water's foggy surface. "R2! R2!" Luke called. He kneeled down on the smooth hull of the ship and... sorry. Hang on. I don't know where that came from. Where was I? He kneeled down on the smooth hull of the ship and leaned forward, anxiously searching for his mechanical friend, but the black waters were serene, revealing not a sign of the little R2 unit. Luke could not tell how deep this still, murky pond might be, but it looked extremely deep. He was suddenly gripped by the realization that he might never see his droid friend again. Just then, a tiny periscope poked through the surface of the water, and Luke could hear a faint gurgling beep. What a relief, Luke thought as he watched the periscope make its way toward shore. He ran along the nose of his X-Wing fighter, and then with the shoreline less than 3 meters away, the young commander jumped into the water and scrambled up the shore. He looked back and saw that R2 was still making his way toward the beach. "Hurry, R2!" Luke shouted. Whatever it was that suddenly moved through the water behind R2 moved too quickly and was too obscured by the mist for Luke to clearly identify it. All he could see was a massive dark form. This creature rose up for a moment, then dove beneath the surface, making a loud bang against the little droid's metal hull. Luke heard the robot's pathetic electronic scream for help, then nothing. Luke stood there, horror-struck, as he continued to stare at the black waters, still as death itself. As he watched, a few telltale bubbles began to erupt at the surface. Luke's heart began to pound in fear as he realized he was standing too near the pond. I don't know what's going on. Where was I? Oh, there we are. I don't know why it took me so long to find the page. Or not the page, the line. I lost it again. But before he could move, the front-sized robot was spit out by the thing lurking beneath the black surface. R2 made a graceful arc through the air and came crashing down onto a soft patch of gray moss. What? It's dark. I didn't get much sleep. Leave me alone, please. Wow, this is gonna be uploaded late. I don't know why. R2, Luke yelled, running to him. "Are you okay?" Luke was grateful that the shadowy swamp lurker had apparently found metal droids neither palatable, nor digestible. "Iggy, enough." Feebly, the robot replied with a series of faint whistles and beeps. "If you're saying coming here was a bad idea, I'm beginning to agree with you," Luke admitted, looking around at their dismal surroundings. At least, he thought, there was a human companionship on the ice world. Here, except for R2, there seemed to be nothing but this murky bog and creatures as yet unseen that might lurk in the falling darkness. Dusk was quickly approaching. Luke shivered in the thickening fog that closed in on him like something alive. He helped R2 back onto his feet, then he wiped away the swamp muck that covered the droid's cylindrical body. As he worked, Luke heard eerie and inhuman cries that emanated from the distant jungle and shuddered as he imagined the beasts that might be making them. By the time he finished cleaning off R2, Luke observed that the sky had grown noticeably darker. Shadows loomed ominously all around him, and the distant cries didn't seem quite so far away anymore. He and R2 glanced around at the spooky swamp jungle surrounding them, then huddled a bit closer. Suddenly, Luke noticed a pair of tiny but vicious eyes winking at them through the shadowy underbrush, then vanishing with the scutter of diminutive feet. He hesitated to doubt the advice of Ben Kenobi, but now he was beginning to wonder if that robed specter had somehow made a mistake leading him to the planet with its mysterious Jedi teacher. He looked over at his X-Wing and groaned when he saw the entire bottom section was completely submerged in the dark waters. How are we going to get that thing flying again? The whole set of circumstances seemed hopeless and somewhat ridiculous. What are we even doing here? He moaned. It was beyond the computerized abilities of R2 to provide an answer for either of those questions, but he made a little comforting beep anyway. It's like a part of a dream, Luke said. He shook his head, feeling cold and frightened. Or maybe I'm going crazy. At least he knew for certain he couldn't have gotten himself into a crazier situation. Whew, okay. A little bit longer than it should have been. I don't know why. I'm very sorry about that, you guys. But hey, we're getting there. Only like 7 more chapters to go, I think. So, I wonder if I should try and read 2 chapters a day so we can get done in time for... Like, if I can do that, I can finish this book by the time The Force Awakens comes out. I mean, other than that, I'd be, like, halfway through Return of the Jedi. Tell you what, first person to comment this video will tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Hopefully it's, like, in the next 2 days or something, so that it can actually make a difference. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Again, I'm really sorry. I'll try again. I mean, I did give Iggy a bath before I started, and I was working out earlier, and I just lost track of time. Anyway, that's not important. I'm just making excuses. So, yeah. With any luck, I can get that truck, and my family and we can work on making that spoof for you guys. If not, I'll try and make it a one-man show again like I did with the other one. Although I guess it really wasn't a spoof. Well, it was, but never mind. Anyway, that's not important. Until next time, bye everybody.